and welcome back to the Legal Weekly Wine, where we discuss the week's hottest legal topics. Up today is part 2 of immigration. We've had some before where we've been talking about specific parts of immigration that we're facing in the Trump administration, but today we have a special guest with us. So just like part 1, we have Abbas Sadiq of Sadiq Law Group. He is an attorney up here with me. That's why he's actually sitting in the same place that I am. I'm Virginia Tarani. I'm also an attorney in Maryland, D.C. and Virginia. We have our co-host, Dr. John Vial, the Honors Dean of Middle Tennessee State University. But what we really want to know is, Abbas, what type of law do you do?
Great question, Virginia, and thank you for having me on. I practice immigration, business, and employment law.
Excellent. And all of these, what areas or I guess what jurisdictions are you barred in?
Right. So I'm licensed in Maryland and D.C., and I practice business law in Maryland and D.C. Employment law, a lot of it is federal. There's some EEOC cases, so that can be pretty much anywhere in the United States.
Okay.
And then immigration is basically international. I have clients all over the world and all over the country.
That's incredible. Mine are fairly limited to Maryland, D.C., and Virginia, where I'm licensed to practice. But it is different. And that's why you're here today, is you have this expertise and specialization in immigration, which is federal law, and you can practice from Texas to California to helping people in India, which is incredible.
Yeah, that's true. I really enjoy it.
Amazing. So, Dr. Vial, you and I are not immigration attorneys, but I understand that you at least have a book regarding immigration.
Oh, yes. I edited a book several years ago called American Immigration and Citizenship, A Documentary History. And it's basically, actually, I want to go back now because I cannot remember if I included the Alien Enemies Act, which is a law passed along with the Alien and Sedition Acts that is now being used as justification for some of the measures that President Trump is taking.
And which was used even in World War II with some of the internment of the Japanese Americans.
Well, I don't know. Let's see. I think the Alien Enemies Act is actually deportation versus. I'm not sure. It may have been. You're probably right. It was used certainly during World War I.
Right.
And there are actually a lot of parallels between what was happening during the Wilson administration and what's happening during the second Trump term.
Goodness. Well, you and I have been talking about the constitutional law side of it, where Dr. Vial is an expert in the Constitution, the framing of the Constitution, the establishment of it, the amending process, and constitutional law. I'm an attorney. I do personal injury law, but I'm also fairly established on constitutional law, and we've done a full program for the 8 basic subjects of the law, including constitutional law. I'm well versed in criminal law, criminal procedure, civil law, torts. I do a lot of torts. So that's what we have at thelawunscripted.com, and The Law Unscripted hosts this program. Now, this is the Weekly Wine, and you two yet again are failing me with
No, we're not.
some water.
We're keeping you grounded.
Unless you turn water into wine, I'm still the only one drinking wine. So I am back. I'm going to stick with the same thing. I've got a Bartonura Moscato d'Asti, and forgiveness if I'm not pronouncing it right. But cheers to both of you. And I think part 2 is going to be a little more dramatic. Cheers. Yeah, the first one we got into a little bit of the politics. Got a couple of examples out there, but what we really want to do, can I still use your first name, Abbas?
Of course.
All right. For those of you who don't know and didn't hit the other episode, Abbas is also my friend and colleague in addition to our expert guest, and Dr. Vial is my father. So we've got friends and family on here, which I think makes for an even more interesting conversation.
For sure.
But, okay, Abbas, with you being immigration, are you seeing, we're going to start right here, are you seeing a difference between last year and your immigration practice from then beforehand to the Trump administration and what's been happening in the last 3 months?
Absolutely, Virginia, and that's a great question. Definitely. People are, well, one, I think I would say they're afraid. A lot of people who don't have a legal status are really afraid and they're asking for letters. Can you give me a letter or something that can show that I'm working on it? Because as we know, it's not really, immigration can take years to get lawful status. But they want letters, they want some proof. Can we have your business card? They're really scared. Um, and then on the other hand, those who are in other countries who are, they have high qualifications for employment based immigration, or they have a successful business for business immigration, or they have a significant amount of funds for investment immigration, they're also confused. What should we do? Is it worth it? Should we really spend 80 or 100,000 on a business in the United States just to find out that our country is on what is it? Now they have like color coded
Yes.
orange, red, whatever. So should we do that? I've had a lot of conversation with potential clients who have are ready to spend 100,000, 80,000 or more, but they're not sure whether they should because they're wondering, well, gee, if we invest all this money in the U.S., what happens if we're not allowed to come?
Oh, wow.
What happens if our immigration petition, our visa application doesn't get approved, or we get stuck in a status because of our country and we're not able to come? Maybe we shouldn't invest that. I actually was just talking to someone who had a very successful business, and he was prepared to invest a substantial amount of money into a restaurant, but he decided to go to Australia because he said, you know what? There's just too much uncertainty, and I don't want to put all that money in an investment in a restaurant and plan to go with my family, my wife, and my kids just to learn that somehow we're not able to come. I'm going to go to Australia.
That,
Let me
and
ask you a question here,
yeah.
if I may, because one of the things that has been argued is that what we're seeing primarily in this area is political theater. That we're picking, the administration seems to be picking a couple high profile cases, maybe purposely, where people are, doing cameras. They love to send them down to El Salvador because who wants to be in that prison?
Right.
Is it possible that we're not really deporting that many more people than usual, but we've gotten more I mean, in fairness to Trump, apparently a lot of people voted for him because they are concerned about undocumented people. And they do believe, I think incorrectly, that undocumented tend to commit higher rates of crime and that sort of thing. But is it, how much of it is show and how much is a genuine difference in the number of people and the types of people who are being deported?
That's a great question, Dr. Vile. And I don't know. I think a lot of it
Yeah.
is show. I really do. I don't know if there's any difference in the numbers. It's a lot of typical with our president. It's bluster, and it's a lot of bluster and puffery. We learned about
Yes.
that in law school.
Right.
But I don't know if the numbers are any difference. But it's scary. You look at some of the videos of these people being. It's like in the United States, we're sending
Right.
people to El Salvador. I mean, what is going on here?
Right.
It's
And then
scary.
claiming we no longer have jurisdiction because El
Even though,
Salvador does.
guess who's paying for them to be there?
We are.
So it's
Yeah.
like, well, if we're paying,
Millions.
how come we can't just say we're not paying anymore? Send them back. But anyway, I think you hit a really good point, Dr. Val, because I don't know whether the numbers are any different or not. I think it's just people are really scared, and that's the point. We're all scared. People are scared to go out. Who don't have a legal status, they're
Yeah.
scared to go out there to do groceries, to take their kids out. And it's just a lot of, basically, it's all about fear.
And
Boss, you raised,
yeah, go ahead,
sorry.
Dan.
You raised another issue. One of the things that President Trump trotted out, which was pretty fascinating, was he seemed to be, there was going to be like a gold green instead of a green card. We were going to give like a gold card for people. What was it, $5 or $10 of value, that if they came here, we would suddenly sort of waive. And I get it. I mean, you're trying to get creative people, but that in and of itself seems to be very contrary to due process, that we're going to treat you better because you have a lot of money. And you know, in the Wilson, well, yeah, in the beginning of the 20th century, Congress tried to adopt laws to prohibit people who were illiterate from coming. And that made sense in a way because, you know, they're not going to be as qualified. But if I remember, here's one where Woodrow Wilson actually pursued a more liberal policy saying you can't blame someone who's illiterate if they come from a country where they didn't have free educational systems.
Right. How can they help it?
Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
great point. So we already have something called EB, or an employment-based visa, category 5, or preference 5. And the goal of that is around 800,000 to 1.1, 1.2 million. So
That they have to pay
yeah.
already.
Right. So,
Oh.
but the goal is that money goes into the U.S. economy. So they have to be able to create 10 jobs. So depending on where you do that, now if you do it here in the DMV, it's going to be 1.1, 1.2 million, right?
Right.
But if you go to rural Nebraska, South Dakota, maybe you can do it for 800,000. So that process does exist, and that's really for entrepreneurs, people with deep pockets.
Right.
But I think what's troubling is that it's really a legislative function, and in the last
Yes.
part, that's what we're talking about, is the expansion, kind of the rapid, just, you know, crazy expansion of the executive power,
Right.
where it's like, wait a minute, isn't that something Congress would write as part of legislation?
Yes.
Because it's related to the Immigration Nationality Act, right? Like, how does the president get to? So I had a lot of questions about that, and I'm wondering, like, hey, can he even really do this? Because it's a law, right?
It's in the Constitution, and Dr. Vile, this is where we go to you. Isn't it in Article 1 of the Constitution that it's a legislative power?
Well, let me get a related issue because that's what I thought we were going to talk about. Tariffs are a form of tax, and the taxing power is the most, you know, the power of the purse is the most quintessential
For Congress.
legislative power there is. Now, Congress also has the power of naturalization, which is most directly related to immigration. But there is a doctrine which has been little used. There have been few Supreme Court cases on it. Schechter Poultry is one of them, which is the non-delegation doctrine. That there are certain legislative, you know, there are certain powers that are so legislative by nature that they cannot be delegated to somebody else. And what has happened with tariffs, and to some degree, I think maybe also with immigration, is Congress has sort of said, well, we're going to give a lot of discretion, and more so maybe with tariffs and immigration, but they purposely said we're going to let the president negotiate for us. I think they need to start clawing some of this power back, or it's going to be gone. I mean, you know, you get up enough precedents that people are going to say, well, there's nothing unusual about that, whereas it's a high deviation, I believe, from the tripartite system of, you know, coordinate branches.
Yeah, and Abbas, I'm going to go back to something else you said about the fear and people not even wanting to go to the grocery store. I'm mostly a civil attorney, but I also do criminal law, and I did for a decade. But my clients are begging to do anything to conclude their case outside of court. So with personal injury, it's like, well, let's take a settlement. And it's like, well, it's not a very good settlement, but it's better to take a settlement than to show up in court. Even as a plaintiff, even if they were injured as a result of somebody else's fault, they don't want to be there because they're afraid they'll be flagged at security, right? At the security line they're going through, somebody says, oh, well, they're brown skinned or they look Hispanic or whatever it is, and they're going to call in ICE while I'm sitting up there. And I'm finding that a lot more. And even my criminal clients, even defendants for traffic cases, are saying, well, I don't want to come to court. I said, well, you have to. You'll be arrested or have a warrant out for you if you don't. And they're saying, well, I've already got ICE, you know, is going to flag me whether I have a warrant or not. So why would I come and give them myself if I'm going to be caught? And I'll tell you, and I know I'm talking on long on this point, but one of the most horrible examples that I've seen in the last week is, and Dr. Vile, maybe you've seen it too, is this criminal defendant in the middle of trial it was some kind of suspension of license or lack of license. It was a driving offense. There was some kind of break in the trial. And between the first part of the trial and what was supposed to be the conclusion is ICE comes and snags him and takes him out. And the judge says, where's the defendant? And the government says, oh, well, he got picked up and he's being deported. And I mean, that is terrifying for most of my clients.
Well, in these cases where, people are appealing their case and they're sent outside the country during, and
while they're legitimately appealing.
Right. I mean, I'm still not sure what I think about whether a judge should be able to turn a plane around in midair. But whatever the answer to that is, the government should not be allowed to be deporting somebody while their status is being decided here by a legitimate court. And for those listeners, and I'm sympathetic to this, who are concerned, we need to know who American citizens are. Particularly if they're violent, we need to get them out of here.
Of course.
But what is going to happen here is victims of violence, if they're immigrants, they're not going to report a rape or a robbery or whatever. And those people who are preying on them are just as likely to be preying on us. So we have to be careful that we don't give a disincentive to those with information that's valuable to all of us from, being afraid to appear in court or appear generally in public.
Yeah, and I mean, I think there's several troubling, issues that come up with what you're saying. One is that where is the justice to the victim?
Yes.
Right. So typically
Right.
we had allowed, the criminal process to play out regardless of a person's status because we want the victims to feel that justice is served. So when
Right.
we're pulling them out, these folks, because they don't have a legal status, then it's like, what happened to the victim, right? Nobody cares. And then the other issue is what happened with our courts?
Yes.
Like these are state, local courts, right? County courts, even if they're federal courts, it doesn't make any sense. But that is also happening now. You might have heard with with the IRS, where now they've agreed to share their data, which had never happened, because that doesn't make any sense either. I have people, they have been paying taxes for like 20 years, and they don't have any legal status. But they're hardworking, they stay out of trouble, and they pay their taxes. So what is the message now if we say, hey, now the IRS is in this data sharing agreement with the USCIS, and whatever you report to the USCIS or the IRS, it's going to be shared. I mean, that doesn't make any sense, right?
And this goes against a precedent whose name I wish I could remember. But there's a case where you used to have to, if you wanted to participate in gambling, you had to file it, and then they could get, so if you didn't pay your taxes on gambling, you were illegal of tax evasion. And if you did pay your taxes, they could track you down because you had identified yourself as an illegal gambler. And the court ruled that this was a violation of the Fifth Amendment. You were forcing people to self-incriminate themselves. And if you think about the consequences here of what you're saying, is it's likely to lead to fewer people paying taxes, right?
Yes. And fewer businesses investing, like you were saying, Abbas.
Well, but I mean, even people who, so if you're undocumented here and you don't want the government to know you're here, you're not going to want to pay your taxes. If you don't pay your taxes, then you're also in hot water. So it's serious.
I mean, how much revenue must people without a status be generating for the government, right?
Yes.
It's going to be billions of dollars. Because we don't really even know how many people are here without a status, right? So it's millions, right? And many of them, at least the ones that come to me, they have tax records for like 10 years,
Amazing.
20 years. They're hardworking. They go to CPAs. And they have this whole book. Because whenever I'm working on their visa petition or their humanitarian petition, they'll bring me like 10, 15, 20 years worth of taxes that they've been paying year after year after year. So what are we telling them now that you pay your taxes, we're going to share that with USCIS and potentially put you at risk for being deported?
Yeah.
Now, the other thing that we haven't brought up was you may have heard about it, Dr. Vile, is where they're requiring people who don't have a legal status to self-report.
Oh, okay. So
So
this
which
is
again
part
is
of the Fifth
self-incrimination,
Amendment.
right? It's yeah.
how does that work? Because it's like if they self-report, then they're going to be somewhere on some database.
Yes.
But on the other hand, if they don't self-report, then what happens when they go to file an asylum claim or a U visa, right, claim? Then
Well, they're just prohibited at that point. It seems like the government is not even allowing them to file these claims.
yeah, and then partly as attorneys, this is a little bit beyond the scope, but where do our ethics fall? Because we want to encourage people to follow the law, right? We're
Absolutely.
also officers of the court. So, but when we tell them, yeah, you should self-report, are we kind of like sealing their fate?
Yeah. That's
And
another.
am I right?
Yeah, go ahead, Dr. Vile.
Sorry. Am I right that the head of the IRS or a couple of the top people have stepped down rather than go along with this?
Yes.
And I see that the Solicitor General's office, which is, the people who generally make the argument before the Supreme Court on behalf of the government, a lot of them are quitting.
Yeah.
And, we talked a week or two ago, some of these law firms that have capitulated, if the country goes down the tubes, I'm sorry, they're going to have to take some responsibility.
Yeah.
Because you do have a duty as an officer of the court.
Yes.
Don't go to law school if the only reason to go is to make money. I mean,
Right.
you're performing a public function, and it is heartening to see. It's heartening to see those who have quit rather than capitulate.
Right.
On the other hand, it's disheartening to see some of the most lucrative firms in the country, and the same thing is happening at the university level. First it was, I don't know, I've lost track, but
The pro-Palestinian protester.
First it was Columbia, then it's Harvard, now it's Cornell.
The ones who are agreeing to drop their policies in order to get the funding.
Are being threatened. We're going to take all your. This is a little bit different, but we're going to take all your government grants away. Even if they don't have anything to. They may be anti-cancer. They may be, anti-AIDS or whatever it is. We're going to take this away from you because we disagree with this policy or that. And it's time. Now is the time for all good firms and universities and everybody and lawyers to unite in the defense of civil liberties.
And with the lawyers, Abbas, I want to throw one out to see if you've seen this article and what it means for us as attorneys when we're talking about our ethical duties as officers of the court. I read an article 2 days ago from USA Today regarding an attorney who had come back from vacation and who was stopped at an airport and pulled aside, detained, told, "We know you're an attorney. Show us your client list." Have you seen this story?
I have, and I know that there was actually recent guidance from the Department of Justice, basically designed to intimidate attorneys who pursue asylum claims. So the recent guidance was that the department should vigorously pursue ethic complaints against attorneys who file, frivolous asylum claims. Now, often there is a statutory limitation to file for asylum within 1 year, but many times people don't know about it. And they're traumatized, they have a lot going on. There's many reasons why we will file a claim beyond 1 year. Right?
That are legitimate reasons.
Legitimate reasons, exactly. But now the DOJ is intimidating attorneys who practice immigration, in immigration court, saying that, look, we're going to start filing complaints against you with your state bar because you file these asylum claims beyond the 1 year statutory limitation. And you and I know as attorneys, that's our goal, is to advocate vigorously for our clients.
Absolutely.
And not bend the rules, but to do as much as we can to advance their case, right?
Yes, within the rules, if we have a legitimate reason, legal reason, factual reason to believe that they could obtain that status or it could be filed even if it gets overturned at the end or squashed, however you want to, in layperson's terms, and they're still deported, the asylum isn't granted, if you had a legitimate basis for making that filing, that's what we're supposed to do. Unless we believe, if we know that there's a fraud being committed, then of course we can't file. But what you're describing seems like another way to intimidate attorneys to not do immigration cases and help people who are applying for normal, legitimate statuses.
Right. And
Yeah.
so your cases are frivolous, but it's not frivolous to file 50 cases questioning the results of the presidential election from 2020.
Right.
That's, frivolous is not, to my knowledge, a legal term, right? I mean, that's a pejorative that's being used by the administration for these law firms that they've gone after. Frivolous cases basically mean cases that are opposing the policies of the Trump administration.
That's the current definition. The normal
Yes.
definition is those
Yes.
that have no merit and the attorney knows they have no merit. But that is a subjective term, is who decides whether they have merit. And yes,
Right.
there's the new definition.
And remember that case we talked about last week, the NAACP versus Button, I believe it was, where the state of Virginia tried to say essentially, barratry, or it's a frivolous case to allow the NAACP to represent someone questioning segregation.
Right. Well, Abbas, with this attorney example, who stopped in the airport, told to disclose all of his clients, tell us who you're representing, what would you do? And what do you think your ethical obligations are, your legal obligations versus you being interrogated?
Yeah, that's a great question. But I think, at the core of it, that's our job, is to vigorously advocate for our clients and to hold their secrets, in our confidence, right? I mean, so I wouldn't. I mean, I know it sounds easy to say here as we're sitting in your house, but I think, that's terrible. It's a terrible situation to be in.
Yes.
But I wouldn't do it. I mean, what can you do, right? Because eventually it has to play out. They have to let you go. As U.S. citizens, and we didn't really touch upon this, we all have a fundamental right to be in this country. Now, USCIS can detain us if they have probable cause, reasonable suspicion. Right. I've been detained. You may have been detained.
I have. It's
unpleasant. It does create a lot of anxiety. You want to know what is going on, and they don't tell you, well, why am I here? And then you look around and you're like, it's scary. But at the end of the day, we have a fundamental right to be here. They can't take away our citizenship. So I think we just have to kind of get through it. There is some guidance about that. But I mean, I wouldn't disclose my client's secrets.
It is scary.
No, I know there's an attorney-client privilege in terms of what's said. Is there one for even who your clients are?
Yes, that is part of client confidence.
And would this be? Yeah.
We technically are not even allowed to tell anyone who we're representing because that is part of the client confidence. Unless they give us authority, specific authority to disclose even their names. But if I'm called, except if I've put in a letter of representation to a company, but if I'm called and asked, do you have so-and-so as a client, I can't confirm or deny it. So even by asking, who are your clients, I believe our ethics obligations are we can't say. And in this case that I'm talking about, I know I keep going back to it, but they saw his list of names as to his contacts, and he kept saying, this is my business phone. I have my business stuff on this phone. And they said, well, we're either going to confiscate your phone or you show us your contact list so we know who your clients are. And all of a sudden he's showing his contact list. So, that is a violation.
Is this with a warrant? I mean,
no, there was no warrant. It was detaining.
With probable, I mean, if you could think of a situation, right? If you found he was representing a terrorist organization or not?
Sure, or committing fraud or an illegal act with or on behalf of his clients. Sure, but
so it
in
wouldn't
this
be
case,
it wouldn't be an absolute right. but you, at the very least, an attorney would have to insist or could insist on a valid search warrant establishing probable cause.
I think they have to, but if they
Yeah.
don't, it seems in this situation they were going to confiscate it anyway
Yeah.
under an idea of terroristic activity or potential illegal immigration, etc.
Yeah, my understanding is that you don't have to share your password, but if you don't share your password, they may be able to confiscate your phone. So I don't know how far that can go, but it does go back to what you said, Dr. Vile, where it's like this is really crossing the bounds beyond reasonable suspicion, beyond just a simple detainment. Hey, where are you going? Why did you go? How long were you there? Who did you meet? Blah blah blah. Right? You bring back
Right.
any fruit, this
Yeah.
kind of thing.
Right,
But when
normal
it
customs
starts to
type
get
stuff.
into, I actually had someone contact me, who's a spiritual leader at a mosque, and he had been frequently detained, and he was very upset about it. And he said that they were even asking him, like, who's picking you up? What is their phone number? What is their, all this information? And I said, this is way beyond the scope of what would be appropriate for detainment. Why do they need to know who's picking you up and that person's cell phone? But it's just like, it's easy to talk about these things sitting here, but when
Yes.
you're in the middle of it, you're stressed. You just want to go home. It's embarrassing sometimes. This person was telling me, I have other people waiting for me to pick me up, and they're like, why are you late? What am I supposed to tell them? If I tell them I'm detained, they're going to want to know why. It's embarrassing.
Yeah. Well, my fear, even, and you're saying as U.S. citizens, we have rights. They're not supposed to detain or deport us without our rights. But if I'm an attorney, which I am going through, even though I don't do immigration, if they believe that some of my clients are illegal, I'm told to do this. And if not, they'll detain me. What if I am detained and then I'm spirited away and I'm missing? I've been disappeared. My husband can't find me for days, if not months, until I finally show up in some jail that's not even in my state. Or I'm deported, not as deportation, but some kind of other, administrative problem. And oops, now I'm in El Salvador. I mean, this is truly, I never thought I'd be thinking this in my whole life as a U.S. citizen, but now I am as an attorney.
Yeah, it's really scary. It's very scary. What are our rights? And I think that's what a lot of people are afraid of. We didn't really touch on it, but a lot of the questions are from people with green cards or lawful permanent resident status. They have weddings to attend, birthday parties to attend, families to see, et cetera, and they're scared. Should we leave the country? Will we be able to come back? What should we do? What kind of questions can we ask? And how far along do we need to comply? And what's interesting is people are now even having issues crossing the border going into Canada because
Yes.
Canadians are now reacting to some of the rhetoric from the current administration. And I have someone in my family who was crossing the border to go to Canada, and that person was telling me about how the Canadians treated him. The questions and the, kind of the, I'd say a little bit like an interrogation. It's like, what? This is Canada, basically.
Right.
But they're reacting to the rhetoric from our administration.
And who can blame them?
And foreign students, I mean, have this problem. You might typically go home for Christmas or New Year's or some celebration. We don't quite know what to tell them. If, there is a danger, you could get detained or, you get caught up in this. And this, by the way, is one of the probably unintended consequences. I feel less willing to travel abroad now.
Yeah.
And apparently, American tourism is hurting. We get a lot of people who like to come here to see our sites who just don't want the hassle of it.
Well, even there was at least one British citizen who was a tourist who was detained and held for at least a couple of days. My question to you is, what are you telling your clients who have green cards, who have legitimate visas? What are you telling them to do if they leave the country?
Honestly, the safest thing is not to leave because it's unfortunately is very discretionary. It can really depend on the mood or the discretion of the Customs and Border officer at the border. And it's and you know, you're an attorney, obviously, so
Right.
you know our clients want answers, and they want to know, can I do this or can I not do this? And a lot of times, the law and the facts are very complicated, so it's hard to really give a clear answer. But in this case, I've just been telling people, unless you really have to travel, you know, someone in your family's having an emergency surgery, medical treatment, or whatever, there's something really urgent, don't travel. If it's just to go to visit or whatever, especially if it's in a country like, I mean, Turkey, India, Pakistan, anywhere in the Middle East, if you can avoid it, avoid it. That's been my advice.
And you've hit on something that goes back to the legal concept of due process.
Yes.
If in fact there's this kind of discretion, that in and of itself is a sign that due process is being violated, because you should be able to know, you should be able to leave the country with a green card with certainty that you're going to be able to come back. And if we're giving this kind of discretion, something is awry.
Definitely, and that had been the case in the past, Dr. Vile, especially for lawful permanent residents or green card holders, because they had proved the moral character, the moral turpitude, etc.
Right.
But
They'd been vetted.
they'd been vetted, exactly. But apparently now that's all gone as well.
So how easily can the government revoke your legal status, non-citizen, but even these green card holders, which seem like they're solid, how they're getting revoked, right?
Yeah, and that's new. I mean, that's new to me. Like we have been talking about, typically it had been noticed in a hearing because they had been vetted, but apparently this somehow remote provision, which I think it's in the INA, that gave the Secretary of the state, you know, the authority to summarily remove people, is just, you know, I mean, we all should be troubled by it, regardless of your political position, whether you support, you know, one side or the other. We all should be concerned, because at the end of the day, it could be us, right?
Yes.
So if, you know, you have a position about women's rights and this issue doesn't touch on that, it could.
Right.
Because they're touching on one issue. It doesn't mean tomorrow they're going to turn around and say, well, hey, you have these certain women's rights, or you have this certain sexual orientation, whatever, and now you're next. Because
Right.
we consider that un-American. We consider that to be something which causes trouble and which is against our Constitution. So therefore, you're now not able to exercise any of those due process rights.
Right.
I mean, we all need to be concerned about this.
Yeah, and even if we don't get deported, can we at least be detained?
Right.
Right.
And again, we've touched on this in past whatever we call
Episodes.
this episodes. But if one administration can do it for one side, you're empowering, you're setting a precedent for the next administration to do it. You know, so if you can have your funds withheld because you have DEI, next administration can withhold them if you don't,
True.
or whatever the particular policy is. And this is, you know, this is where the old Republican in me says sometimes the government can get so powerful that there's no room left. They want to dictate everything according to the current administration. And, you know, what separated us traditionally, even from parliamentary democracies, was we didn't have these lurches from one administration to another. And what we're seeing with all these executive orders is it's almost like, you know, you get, what is it, close to over 100 orders now in the first 70 or 80 days. Many of these are overturning orders that the previous president had done, or previous presidents. It's not a very good way to run a railroad or a government.
And Abbas, I have another question with regard to all of this, and Dr. Val, you make some really good points, is it can be turned on its head, but I have clients, I don't even do immigration law, and I have clients who are scared, but I have at least one client who's disappeared. I cannot find this client. We've done everything we can to contact the client, to find the client, and the client's gone. I cannot move forward with their case unless I have the client and their consent. is there anything that I can do as their attorney to find them if they are in custody, to find out if they are in custody, to find out if they've been deported? Is there any list? Is there any kind of service that I can use?
That's a great question. Yes, there is. There is actually a USCIS locator. So you can just kind of search that up on Google. You do need some basic information. Ideally, you would have what's called their alien number, which is a 9-digit number, which would be greatly helpful. But you may not always have that. Not everyone has one. That's the best thing if you have an alien number. If you don't have that, then basically you need their name, obviously first name, last name. You need to know their country of origin, and you need to know their date of birth. And then usually if they're in the system, you can find them. Now, the only caveat with that is it does take USCIS a couple of days to update. So if someone disappears and you go to the USCIS locator, you might not find them for two days, 3 days sometimes. But if they're in USCIS custody and they've been in custody for, say, 3 days, they should show up on that locator.
What if they've already been deported? Would that still show?
If they've already been deported, it should show something.
Okay. And what about, I'm going to have us wrap up. We could talk forever. I'll have us wrap up on part 2. Maybe we do a part 3. But I want to mention one other case that I've heard about. And Abbas, I want to get your take on this because the lawyer case was the next to most concerning to me. But the most concerning case that I've heard is one in which there is a naturalized U.S. citizen who came when he was approximately 4 or 5, became a citizen, served in the military, came back from the military, had PTSD, ended up committing a crime, and has been held in prison for years, maybe even decades, I can't remember. As soon as he got out of prison, he was picked up by ICE, and he has been held by ICE, and they're trying, at least according to the article that I read, they're trying to deport him back to his country of origin. He's a naturalized citizen. Is that legal? Has that been done before the Trump administration?
You know, I haven't heard about a similar situation for a naturalized citizen. I know of course, we spoke about visa holders,
right,
and even green card holders. Certain types of crimes of moral turpitude can be held against you. Felonies, etc., can be, used against you. But once you're naturalized, I don't know. That is a really tough question.
There were some cases in the 1950s which are similar, and I'm not sure that I can give their names or all the outcomes, but they involve, the 4-year-old wouldn't work, but they involve people who came into the United States, were naturalized, but apparently did not provide information. They had been a communist abroad, or they had committed a crime abroad that they hadn't told. And I can't remember, but I know there have been cases like that where then, generally, I think the courts have leaned toward, once you're a citizen, we try not to distinguish between types of citizens. But I believe during the McCarthy era that there were some people who were deported on the basis that they had not been candid in achieving their citizenship.
But that seems more like fraud in the in the application and obtaining of the citizenship, versus this one where there was no fraud. The crime was committed during the citizenship, so there was nothing to have declared that was held secret, and that to me is one of the most concerning.
Definitely, it's very troubling. After, as we kind of said, someone's been vetted, they've been a citizen, then they commit this crime. Yeah, I think we all need to be concerned about these cases.
Okay. Well, goodness. Thank you, Abbas. This is Abbas Sadiq from Sadiq Law Group, and we're...
May I ask one more question on his behalf?
Yes, please.
Okay. So, Abbas, I'm assuming you take paying customers.
Yes.
But what if someone doesn't have money and is in one of these situations? Are there services, either you or someone else, that they could go to? Because I think some people might be listening and just don't know at all what to do.
Yeah, no, we take all kinds of clients. We do have our bills to pay, but we try to be very flexible with our clients in terms of payment arrangements and setups, etc. And we work with everybody. I like to think we don't turn people away for money as long as people have some, they understand that, hey, well, this is not a pro bono firm and
Right.
there's some expectation of payment at some point. We're happy to work with anybody.
Excellent.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you for asking that question, Dr. Vile. And that's Dr. Vile, Dean of the Honors College of Middle Tennessee State University. Abbas Sadiq is located in Maryland, but does immigration law throughout the country and even overseas, as well as, I understand, employment and business law, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
All right. Everybody, thank you for listening. Drop a comment, hit like, and subscribe to continue to watch our channel and the updates as we go through the crazy legal weekly news that we have. And we will catch you next time on the Legal Weekly Wine.